They said he was a model citizen, a man of wealth and reputation, a grieving widower doing his best to raise a little girl with special needs. But behind the tall gates of Lakeshore Pines, truth had teeth, and the dog knew it first. That morning, under the golden sun, he carried a 5-year-old girl in a blue dress to the backyard, her tiny hands clutching a stuffed rabbit, eyes wide with trust. Then, without a word, he locked her in a cage meant for animals and watched. Cold water, cold eyes, cold heart. No one saw, except for Max, the old golden retriever. He watched everything. Was it loyalty? Was it instinct? Or something deeper? Because what that dog did in the nights that followed changed everything. What would you do if the only soul who cared about your child had 4 legs and no voice? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Was Max just a dog, or something more? Let's see how that all played out. The gravel of the long, winding driveway at Lakeshore Pines crunched under the tires of the old sedan. A sound as out of place in the manicured opulence as the woman and child who emerged. Ruth, her face a roadmap of worry and years spent fighting a losing battle, gently coaxed a small girl from the back seat. Ella, all of 5 years, clutched a battered suitcase in one hand, her other lost in the folds of a simple blue dress that had seen better days. Her eyes, wide and the color of a summer sky just before a storm, took in the grandeur of the estate. The sprawling lawns that kissed the edge of the shimmering lake, the towering pines that whispered secrets to the wind, and the distant shapes of animals moving in a large, well-kept paddock. For a moment, a flicker of something akin to wonder, or perhaps just the innocent absorption of a child, softened the fear that clung to her like a second skin. She remained silent, a tiny, obedient shadow. Graham Whitmore, a man whose wealth was as vast as the ego that propelled him, watched their approach from the grand portico of his mansion. He was a figure carved from ambition and disdain, his tailored suit a stark contrast to their worn attire. He had been expecting this, though he'd hoped Ruth's pride, or perhaps her failing health, would spare him the inconvenience. "She's your blood, Graham," Ruth began, her voice raspy but firm, cutting through the manufactured tranquility of the afternoon. I can't do it anymore. She needs her father." Graham's laugh was a short, sharp bark, devoid of humor. "Father, that's rich. Ruth, you show up here after all these years, dragging this child, and expect what? A brass band." His eyes, cold chips of granite, flickered over Ella, who flinched and tried to make herself smaller behind her grandmother. He saw not a daughter, but a complication, a messy reminder of a past he'd meticulously buried. "She's 5 years old. Graham, she's your flesh and blood," Ruth insisted, her frail body trembling slightly. "Get off my property," Graham snarled, his voice dropping to a venomous hiss. He gestured sharply to a burly security guard who had materialized from the shadows of the house. "Escort this woman out, now." Tears streamed down Ruth's face as the guard firmly took her arm. "You can't do this, Graham. She's just a little girl. What kind of monster are you?" Her cries faded as she was led, unceremoniously, back towards the gate, leaving Ella standing alone, a tiny, abandoned island in a sea of hostile wealth. Graham watched until the sedan was out of sight. Then, his face a mask of cold fury, he turned to Ella. The brief spark of interest she'd shown in the distant animals was extinguished, replaced by a palpable terror. He grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "Not a word," he muttered, dragging her not towards the gleaming front doors, but around the side of the sprawling mansion, towards the service areas and beyond. There, hidden from the pristine facade of Lakeshore Pines, was a relic of a less image-conscious past, a row of old kennels, one of which was a large, rusted iron cage, once home to a particularly unruly Irish wolfhound. With a grunt, Graham wrenched open the stiff door and shoved Ella inside. The metal was cold and gritty against her skin. "You stay here. You make a sound, and you'll regret it," he threatened. Then, as if an afterthought of pure malice, he grabbed a nearby hose, turned the spigot, and doused the child in a spray of icy water. Ella gasped, shivering violently, but a deeper, more primal training kept her silent. He slammed the cage door shut, the rusty bolt screeching in protest, and stalked away, leaving her soaked, terrified, and utterly alone as dusk began to bleed across the sky, unseen by Graham, but a solemn witness to the entire exchange. Was Max a magnificent golden retriever, his coat the color of spun sunlight. Max resided in a spacious, modern run, a comfortable distance from the old kennels, but with a clear line of sight. He was Graham's show dog, a symbol of idyllic family life for a man who valued symbols far more than substance. Max didn't understand the words, the history, the bitter adult resentments, but he understood the raw, jagged edge of Graham's anger, the trembling fear in the small girl, and the unmistakable scent of distress that now wafted from the old cage. He whined softly, a low thrum of unease in his chest, his intelligent eyes fixed on the huddled shape of the child. He'd seen Graham's temper before, but never this calculated cruelty, never directed at something so small and defenseless. The sight of the water, the slammed door, the girl's silent terror. It resonated with a primal instinct of protection. Later, as the estate settled into its nightly rhythm of hushed servitude, Graham summoned his core staff to the library, a room paneled in dark wood and smelling of old money and deceit. His voice was low, conspiratorial. "No one is to speak of the child. She is not to be acknowledged. As far as anyone is concerned, she was never here. This is a private matter, a family secret. I will handle it." His gaze swept over them, daring any dissent, to Amanda, his sophisticated, soon-to-be wife, a woman who valued her position and the lifestyle Graham provided above all else. He spun a different tale. They were in their opulent bedroom, the lights of the distant city twinkling like fallen stars. "Darling," he began, his voice smooth as bourbon. "There was a rather unpleasant incident today. A disturbed woman, claiming some distant relation, brought a child here, some sort of orphan, clearly delusional, trying to extort money. Can you imagine the audacity?" Amanda, applying a sliver of expensive cream to her flawless cheek, barely paused. "How dreadful. Graham, did you have them removed?" "Immediately," he said, satisfaction lacing his tone. "It's handled. Just a piece of unfortunate refuse trying to attach itself to us." He leaned in, kissing her shoulder. "Nothing for you to worry your pretty little head about." Amanda smiled, a practiced, perfect curve of her lips. "Of course, darling, you always know best." But later, as she lay in the dark, a sliver of unease, tiny and sharp, pricked at the edges of her complacency. She'd heard a child's cry earlier, or thought she had, faint and quickly stifled, carried on the evening breeze. She dismissed it. Graham was right. He always knew best. In the rusted cage, Ella shivered, not just from the cold, but from a bone-deep loneliness. The moon, a cold silver disk, offered little comfort. Her small hand, still clutching the handle of her suitcase as if it were her only anchor, ached. She pressed her face against the bars, her breath fogging the cold metal. Her gaze drifted towards the larger, newer kennels where a golden shape moved restlessly. Max, he was pacing, his silhouette framed by the moonlight. He'd stop, look towards her, then pace again. He let out a soft, almost inaudible whimper. Ella didn't understand dog language, but in the deep, dark well of her despair, she felt a flicker, not of hope, but of shared presence. She wasn't entirely alone in the vast, uncaring darkness of Lakeshore Pines. The dog knew she was there, and in his troubled movements, in the soft sounds he made, there was a sorrow that mirrored her own. It was a fragile thread, that awareness, but in the desolate landscape of her current existence, it was the only thread she had. The biting cold of the iron cage was eventually deemed too risky, not out of any burgeoning compassion from Graham, but from the pragmatic fear of a more visible illness, something harder to conceal. So, Ella was moved. Her new prison was the attic, a vast, dusty expanse smelling of forgotten things and brittle memories, a fitting repository for a child Graham wished to forget. A single, grime-streaked dormer window became her portal to the outside world. From this lonely perch, high above the meticulously kept grounds, she could see the sprawling lawns, the distant shimmer of the lake, and, most importantly, Max's domain. Each morning, as the first pale light of dawn filtered through the dirty glass, Ella would press her small face to the window, and each morning, Max, as if sensing her vigil, would be there in his run, his magnificent head lifted, his gaze often drifting towards the upper reaches of the house, timidly at first. Then, with a growing sense of ritual, Ella would raise a small hand in a silent wave. After a day or two, Max began to respond, not with a bark that might draw unwanted attention, but with a gentle, almost imperceptible thump of his plumy tail against the ground, a soft flutter that spoke volumes across the distance. This silent communion became the fragile scaffolding of Ella's days, a secret friendship woven in glances and gestures, a lifeline in her profound isolation. He was a splash of gold in her gray world, a promise that something warm and alive still existed beyond the suffocating confines of her fear. Weeks bled into a monotonous rhythm of near solitary confinement, punctuated by the hurried delivery of meager meals by a stone-faced housekeeper who never met Ella's eyes. Then, one crisp autumn afternoon, a change. Graham, perhaps feeling a sliver of unease about potential legal ramifications should his ward be discovered in a perpetually locked state, or perhaps simply to further his narrative to Amanda, decreed that Ella be allowed some supervised time outdoors. The child needs fresh air, he'd announced with an air of magnanimity that fooled no one who truly knew him. Mrs. Peterson, he'd instructed the housekeeper, take her to the rear paddock for an hour and keep her away from the main house. As Ella, pale and blinking in the unfamiliar sunlight, was led towards the less manicured expanse behind the stables, Max, who was being walked nearby by a young kennel hand, caught her scent. With a joyful bark that was pure, untamed golden retriever, he bounded forward, leash momentarily forgotten by the startled handler. Graham, who happened to be observing from a distant terrace with Amanda, tensed, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. He anticipated fear, a confirmation of the child's supposed wildness, perhaps even a minor incident he could later twist to his advantage. But Max didn't lunge or snarl. He skidded to a halt before Ella, his whole body wriggling with an emotion so profound it was almost human. He sniffed her outstretched hand, then, with a gentleness that belied his size, licked her fingers, his tail a blur of ecstatic motion. Ella, who had instinctively braced for an impact, slowly relaxed. A tiny, tremulous smile touched her lips. She reached out and buried her small hand in his thick, soft fur. I think he's sad, Ella said, her voice small and breathy, directed more to the dog than the grim-faced housekeeper. Like I am when Daddy doesn't want to talk to me. She used the word daddy with a child's unwavering hope, oblivious to its bitter irony in this context. Amanda, standing beside Graham on the terrace, watched the scene unfold. The child's innocent, heartbreaking words, juxtaposed with the dog's unrestrained affection, struck a discordant note within her. Graham's explanation of a delusional orphan suddenly felt thin. A poorly constructed stage flat. She saw not a wild, unmanageable child, but a small, lonely girl, and a dog offering a comfort that was conspicuously absent from any human in her vicinity. A seed of doubt, planted by that faint, half-forgotten cry on Ella's first night, began to germinate. He seems rather taken with her for a dangerous stray's child, wouldn't you say? Graham, she remarked, her tone carefully neutral. Graham scoffed. Animals are sentimental. It means nothing. But his eyes narrowed, watching the pair. That night, Amanda couldn't shake the image of Ella and Max, the child's quiet sorrow, the dog's unambiguous love. Graham's casual cruelty had always been a part of him, a trait she'd chosen to overlook, to reframe as decisiveness or strength. But this felt different. This involved a child, driven by a nascent, uncomfortable sense of unease. She waited until Graham was asleep, then slipped out of their room. Her investigation was initially aimless, a vague searching for something. She found herself drawn to Graham's private study, a room she rarely entered. There, tucked away in the back of a seldom-used filing cabinet, under a miscellany of old business ventures, she found a slim, forgotten photo album. The pictures were older, faded. A younger Graham, less hardened, but with the same predatory gleam in his eyes. And then, a woman with sunshine in her hair and a smile that could melt glaciers. She was often pictured with dogs, her hands gentle, her posture confident. In several photos, a younger Gonglier Max, clearly a puppy, frolicked at her feet, looking up at her with adoration. The woman's name, scribbled on the back of one photo in a looping, feminine hand, was Marina. Marina and Max, Lakeshore Training Kennels. 2018. Amanda's blood ran cold. Marina, she'd heard the name whispered once, years ago, by a disgruntled former employee Graham had fired. A fleeting reference to a local girl, a dog trainer, a messy situation. Graham had dismissed it as malicious gossip. Now, looking at Marina's luminous face, her obvious connection with Max, a sickening clarity began to dawn. Deeper in the cabinet, tucked inside a dusty ledger, she found it, a small, leather-bound journal. Marina's journal. With trembling hands, Amanda opened it. The entries, written in that same looping script, painted a devastating picture. Love, initially, for Graham, full of hope and dreams of a future. Then, the dizzying joy of discovering her pregnancy, quickly followed by the crushing despair of Graham's reaction. His denial, his anger, his cold, calculated abandonment when she refused to take care of it. Marina wrote of her struggle, her failing health after Ella's birth, her fierce love for her daughter, and her eventual, heartbreaking decision to leave Ella with Ruth, her own mother, as her illness progressed. He will never acknowledge her. One entry read, the ink blurred, as if by tears. He said she would ruin him. My beautiful girl. A ruin. The last few entries were faint, the handwriting shaky, detailing her losing battle with a swift and merciless disease. The truth, in all its ugly, unvarnished horror, lay bare in Amanda's hands. Graham hadn't been targeted by an extortionist. He had systematically destroyed a life, then sought to erase the evidence. His own daughter. Max wasn't just any dog. He was Marina's dog, trained by her, loved by her. A few days later, the housekeeper, perhaps softened by Ella's quiet obedience or by some internal moral reckoning, left the attic door unlocked for a brief period while she attended to a more urgent task downstairs. Edya, drawn by an unfamiliar silence and a sliver of light from the hallway, crept out. She wandered, ghost-like, through the silent, opulent upper corridors of the house she was meant to be invisible in. In a rarely used sitting room, a room that seemed to hold its breath with disuse, a framed photograph sat on a side table. missed in Amanda's initial sweep. It was one of the photos Amanda had seen. Marina, vibrant and smiling, with a slightly younger Max by her side, his head resting on her knee. Ella, small and drawn, tiptoed closer. She peered at the image, her brow furrowed in concentration. Her own memories of her mother were hazy, dreamlike fragments, but the dog was unmistakable. His golden fur, the intelligent kindness in his eyes. It was Max, her Max. She reached out a tentative finger, tracing the outline of the dog in the photograph. Then the smiling face of the woman. A whisper, barely audible, escaped her lips. "This doggy," she murmured, a sense of wonder dawning in her sky-blue eyes. He was Mommy's friend. The realization that Ella knew, or at least intuited, Max's connection to her mother, however innocently, did not soften Graham Whitmore. Instead, it solidified his cold resolve. The child was not just a nuisance, she was a living, breathing link to a past he had brutally excised. Her presence, her very existence, was a ticking clock, threatening to detonate the carefully constructed edifice of his life. He began to see her not as a daughter, but as a cancerous growth that needed to be removed before it metastasized and destroyed everything he valued. His reputation, his impending marriage to Amanda, his untarnished image, his mind, always calculating, always ruthless, landed on a suitably cruel and conveniently deniable solution. Max. He summoned Vic, a burly, taciturn man who served as head of security and general fixer, a man whose loyalty was bought and paid for in thick wads of cash and the implicit promise of continued employment. No questions asked. Vic had a background in canine units, not the show dog kind, but the kind that barked with the authority of a gun. "Vic," Graham began, his voice smooth, almost casual, as they stood near Max's immaculate run, the dog himself watching them with placid curiosity. "Max has become unpredictable, too soft. I need him retrained, sharpened. We need to reintroduce some of his primal instincts, a more aggressive edge." Vic, a man of few words and even fewer moral scruples when on Graham's payroll, simply nodded. "What kind of edge are we talking, Mr. Whitmore?" Graham's eyes flicked towards the distant attic window. A barely perceptible movement. "I want him conditioned to respond aggressively to a specific trigger, a specific scent." He produced a small, cheap doll, one he'd had the housekeeper pilfer from Ella's meager belongings in the attic. This belonged to the girl. "Use it. Special attack technique. I want him to see this, to smell this, and to react decisively. Understand?" Vic understood perfectly. He was being asked to turn a beloved family pet into a weapon, aimed squarely at a child. "It'll take some work. Mr. Whitmore, he's a golden, not a shepherd. They're bred for gentleness. Then unbreed it out of him." Graham snapped. "I expect results. Vic, consider it a priority. This is about safeguarding my home, my family." The lie tasted like ash in his mouth, but he delivered it with chilling conviction. Amanda, armed with the devastating knowledge from Marina's journal and her own growing horror, confronted Graham later that evening. The journal lay open on the polished surface of his mahogany desk, a silent testament to his cruelty. "I know, Graham," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and grief. "I know about Marina. I know Ella is your daughter." Graham didn't flinch. He merely poured himself a brandy, his hand perfectly steady. And Amanda echoed, incredulous. "She's your child. How can you treat her like this? Locking her away? Plotting?" "Graham, I heard you with Vic. You're trying to turn Max against her." Her voice rose. "She's your own flesh and blood." His eyes, when they finally met hers, were glacial. "Precisely. Amanda, she is my flesh and blood. A direct link to a mistake I thought I'd buried. That's exactly why I can't allow her to destroy everything I've built. She's a loose end. And my dear, do not tolerate loose ends. So, you'd kill her, Amanda whispered, aghast. You'd have her own dog, her mother's dog, attack her. Accidents happen, Graham said smoothly, taking a sip of his brandy. Especially with animals. It would be a tragedy. Unforeseen. No one would be to blame. He almost sounded like he believed it himself. The cold finality in his voice, the utter absence of remorse, terrified Amanda more than any overt threat. She saw then the true abyss of his nature. The appointed afternoon arrived cloaked in an unnerving stillness. The sky was a bruised purple, threatening a storm. Under Graham's direct, albeit discreet, instruction, Vic had been working with Max for days, using the scented doll, employing harsh, fear-based techniques designed to override years of gentle companionship. Max had become sullen, confused, his joyous nature clouded by a new, wary anxiety. Ija, meanwhile, had been granted another outing. This time, she was given a small, slightly rickety wooden wheelchair, a relic from some Whitmore ancestor, to navigate the paved paths near the kennels. The housekeeper, her face set in lines of grim resignation, pushed her along. As they neared Max's run, Vic, stationed nearby as if casually tending to kennel maintenance, made a subtle adjustment to one of the wheelchair's wheels. He'd loosened it earlier, just enough. Graham watched from the second-floor balcony of the main house, a dark silhouette against the opulent backdrop of his life. He gave a barely perceptible nod. The housekeeper, feigning a sudden distraction, stepped away. The tampered wheel wobbled, caught, and the wheelchair tipped, spilling Ella onto the hard ground with a small cry. Just a few feet from Max's kennel, it was the cue. Vicky, with a sharp command, unlatched Max's gate. Now, Max, get it, Vic hissed. Gesturing towards Ella, the dog shot out, a golden blur of pent-up energy and confused aggression, instincts warring within him. He barked, a harsh, unfamiliar sound that wasn't his usual happy greeting. Ija, small and vulnerable on the ground, looked up at the approaching whirlwind of fur and teeth. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her. But something deeper, that intuitive connection, that memory of a photograph, held. Max, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the dog's growls. She didn't scream, didn't try to scramble away. She just lay there, looking at him, her wide blue eyes filled not with terror, but with a strange, heartbreaking understanding. It's okay, Max, don't be scared. I won't hurt you. The words, spoken with such profound, innocent empathy, seemed to penetrate the fog of Vic's brutal conditioning. Max skidded to a halt, inches from her. He lowered his head, his body quivering. He sniffed her hair, her cheek, the scent of her mingling with the hated, confusing scent of the doll he'd been forced to savage. The internal battle was visible in the tension of his muscles, the conflicted flicker in his eyes. Then, a low growl rumbled in his chest, but it wasn't directed at Ella. He straightened, turned, and faced Vic, planting himself squarely between the man and the child. The growl deepened, baring his teeth. No longer a confused or conditioned response, but a clear, unambiguous warning. He was protecting her. Just then, Amanda, who had been watching from a hidden vantage point near the stables, her heart pounding in her chest, ran forward. She scooped Ella into her arms, shielding her with her own body, her eyes blazing at Vic. "Get away from them," she cried. Ella, nestled in Amanda's embrace, looked over her shoulder at the still growling Max. "He saved me," she whispered, her voice awed. "Max saved me. Amanda." Amanda held her tighter. "Yes, darling, yes, he did." She looked from Max, now standing like a golden sentinel, to Vic's stunned, uneasy face, and then up to the balcony. Graham Whitmore stood frozen, his handsome face a mask of disbelief, fury, and something else. Something that might have been the first flicker of dawning horror at what he had almost become. Or perhaps merely the frustration of a meticulously crafted plan gone spectacularly awry. The wind whipped around them, carrying the scent of rain and the undeniable truth of a bond that no amount of cruelty could sever. What did you think of today's story? If it made your day, drop a good in the comments. If it didn't hit the mark, just type 1. Got your own thoughts? I'd love to hear them below. And hey, don't forget to hit subscribe. It's free, and it really helps the channel grow. Thank you so much for being here. The image of Graham's face, contorted in that moment of thwarted malice on the balcony, burned itself into Amanda's mind. It was the final, horrifying confirmation she needed. The man she had once, however naively, admired for his ambition and strength, was a hollow shell, rotten to the core. Her fear was eclipsed by a cold, steely resolve. She would not let him win. She would not let him harm Ella, or Max, ever again. The charade of their engagement, the illusion of her future as Mrs. Graham Whitmore, crumbled into dust. Her only focus now was justice for Marina and safety for Ella. The very next morning, feigning a shopping trip, Amanda drove not to the glittering boutiques of the city, but to the county hospital, a far less glamorous institution where Ruth, Ella's grandmother, was reportedly recovering from a bout of severe bronchitis, exacerbated, no doubt, by Graham's cruelty. Amanda found her in a small, sterile room, looking even more fragile than before. Mrs. Peterson. Amanda began softly, using Ella's grandmother's surname. Ruth's eyes, roomy but sharp, fixed on her. "You're Whitmore's woman." It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact. I was, Amanda corrected, her voice quiet but firm. "I need your help, Ruth." For Ella. Over the next hour, Amanda laid out what she knew, what she suspected, and what she had witnessed. Ruth listened, her expression shifting from suspicion to a dawning, weary understanding. The older woman, who had fought for her granddaughter for so long, saw an unexpected and perhaps untrustworthy ally. But Amanda's sincerity, her palpable distress, and her mention of Max's intervention began to chip away at Ruth's reserve. "He always was a good dog," Ruth murmured, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. Marina, she picked him special, knew he had a good soul. By the end of their conversation, Ruth entrusted Amanda with a worn envelope. Inside was Ella's original birth certificate, clearly naming Graham Whitmore as the father, and a copy of a paternity test result that Graham had furiously demanded years ago, hoping to disprove his connection, only to have it confirm the undeniable. "He paid to have it buried," Ruth said, her voice thin, "like he tried to bury Marina, like he's trying to bury my Ella." Amanda's hand tightened around the envelope. "He won't succeed, Ruth, I promise you." Before leaving, Amanda carefully placed a small, high-quality digital voice recorder on the bedside table. "I have something else," she said, a recording of Graham discussing his plans for an accident involving Ella and Max. "I transferred it to a USB. It's damning." She showed Ruth the tiny drive. "This stays with you for now. As a backup, I have copies." Armed with the documents and the chilling recording, Amanda's next calls were to a renowned, bulldog-tough family law attorney in the city and, more urgently, to the local Child Protective Services hotline. She detailed the situation calmly, methodically, presenting the facts, her voice devoid of the hysteria she felt roiling beneath the surface. Investigations were promised, appointments made. The wheels of justice, often slow, began to grind. Back at Lakeshore Pines, an unspoken tension permeated the air. Idja, though still largely confined, was now under Amanda's subtle but fierce protection. Amanda insisted the child stay in a guest room on the main floor, closer to her, citing the attic's dust as detrimental. Graham, sensing the shift in Amanda, the new, unyielding quality in her gaze, became more erratic, his temper flaring at the slightest provocation. He knew he was losing control. Max, in this new dynamic, became Ella's shadow. Whenever Ella was in her room, Max would lie patiently outside her door. If she sat by the window, he would position himself on the lawn below, his gaze fixed on her, a silent, golden guardian. His devotion was absolute, a quiet rebuke to Graham's heartlessness. This unwavering loyalty, particularly Max's protective stance after the incident at the kennels, enraged Graham further. The dog, once a symbol of his affluence and supposed benignity, was now another daily reminder of his exposed cruelty and his failure. His breaking point came a few days later. "That damned dog is a liability," Graham announced one morning, his voice tight with fury. "I've made arrangements. Vic is taking him to a specialized training facility upstate. They'll sort him out or dispose of him." He didn't look at Amanda, didn't dare meet her eyes. Amanda felt a chill despite the morning sun. "You wouldn't." "It's done," Graham snarled. "He's a dangerous animal." When Vic arrived later that day with a heavy-duty transport crate and a choke chain, Max, sensing the threat not just to himself but perhaps to Ella, reacted instantly. As Vic approached, Max, who was lying beside Ella as she quietly drew pictures on the veranda, rose with a low, rumbling growl. He didn't lunge, but he moved, positioning himself firmly in front of Ella, his body a solid, unwavering shield. He barked once, a deep, authoritative sound that echoed across the manicured lawns. It was the moment Amanda had, with grim foresight, anticipated and meticulously planned for. "Now, Miss Earl Hayes, if you would," Amanda said, her voice carrying clearly. From the side of the house, her attorney, Miss Eleanor Hayes, a woman whose sharp intellect was matched only by her impeccably tailored suit, stepped forward. Beside her were two representatives from Child Protective Services and, discreetly filming from the edge of the driveway, a reporter and cameraman from a local investigative news team Amanda had reluctantly contacted as a last resort. A nuclear option against Graham's power. Graham froze, his face paling as he took in the assembly. Vic hesitated, the choke chain dangling uselessly from his hand. "Mr. Whitmore," Ms. Hayes began, her voice calm but carrying the weight of irrefutable authority. "We are here on behalf of Miss Ella Whitmore." She gestured towards the small girl, who was now clutching Max's fur, her eyes wide with confusion but not fear. "Not while Max was there. This is an outrage. Private property." Graham blustered, but the usual conviction was absent from his tone. "Indeed," Amanda interjected, stepping forward. She held up the birth certificate. "A birth certificate, Mr. Whitmore, listing you as Ella's father." She then produced the DNA report and a paternity test, confirming that fact with 99.9% certainty. Her voice, though trembling slightly, was clear and strong. Finally, she held up a small USB drive. "And this is a recording of you, Graham, instructing Victor here to retrain Max to attack Ella, to stage an accident. Your words, I believe, were that you do not tolerate loose ends." A stunned silence fell over the assembled group, broken only by the whir of the news camera. The CPS workers exchanged grim glances. Vic looked like he wanted the earth to swallow him. Graham stared at Amanda, his face a mask of disbelief morphing into pure, unadulterated fury. "You treacherous!" But before he could finish, Idja, who had been watching the adults with a child's unnerving perception, spoke. Her voice was small, yet it cut through the tension like a tiny poignant bell. She looked directly at Graham. Her eyes, so like her mother's, filled with a sorrow that no child should ever know. "I just wanted you to love me, Daddy," she whispered, her small hand stroking Max's head, like I love Max. The simple, devastating honesty of her words hung in the air, a profound indictment. The reporter visibly flinched. One of the CPS workers, a woman with kind eyes, subtly wiped a tear from her cheek. Even Miss Hayes seemed momentarily moved. Graham Whitmore, for the first time in his life, looked utterly defeated. The carefully constructed walls of his empire, built on lies and cruelty, were crumbling around him. Within minutes, after a hushed consultation between Miss Hayes and the CPS officials, local police who had been discreetly waiting down the road were summoned. Graham Whitmore was escorted from his mansion, not in handcuffs immediately, but clearly under investigation, his protests sputtering into silence under the cold, official stares and the relentless eye of the camera. In the tumultuous weeks that followed, the legal system moved with uncharacteristic speed, bolstered by the irrefutable evidence and the public outcry fueled by the news report. Amanda, with Ruth's tearful blessing, was granted emergency and then full legal guardianship of Ella. Lakeshore Pines, once a monument to Graham's ego, was put up for sale, its assets frozen, and Max, the brave, loyal golden retriever who had seen a helpless child and chosen love over fear, was officially, joyfully, adopted by Amanda and Ella. He trotted out of Lakeshore Pines beside them, not in a crate destined for a brutal camp, but with his head held high, his tail wagging, a beloved member of a new, smaller, but infinitely more loving family, leaving the wreckage of Graham Whitmore's life behind them, stepping forward into the uncertain but hopeful light of a new day. The fall of Graham Whitmore was as swift and brutal as the cruelty he himself had dispensed. The ensuing legal battles were messy, publicized, and ultimately decisive. Lakeshore Pines, stripped of its grandeur and tainted by scandal, was sold at auction, its proceeds tangled in lawsuits and settlements. But Amanda and Ella, with Max faithfully by their side, had already turned their backs on its gilded cage. They moved, with Ruth, whose health had surprisingly rallied with the lifting of her long-held burdens, into a modest but comfortable farmhouse a few towns over, a place with rolling fields and a sturdy old barn, a place that felt like home, in a way the mansion never could. It was there, amidst the scent of hay and wildflowers, that the idea for Hope Haven was born. Amanda, having witnessed firsthand the profound, healing power of the bond between a child and an animal, felt a calling. Ruth, with her lifetime of quiet resilience and surprising practicality, became her steadfast partner. They envisioned a sanctuary, not just for rescued animals, but for children who, like Ella, carried invisible wounds. Using a portion of the settlement Amanda eventually received from Graham's fractured estate, money she considered blood money but was determined to repurpose for good, and driven by an unwavering purpose, they began to build. Hope Haven Animal Therapy Center officially opened its doors a year after Graham's arrest. The old barn, lovingly restored, became its heart. Max, of course, was its founding canine ambassador. He was joined by a motley crew of other rescued dogs, a shy three-legged hound, a boisterous terrier mix who'd been abandoned, a gentle giant of a shepherd mix found wandering the highways. Each had a story, each had scars, but each also possessed an extraordinary capacity for love and patience. Their first pilot program was small, designed for children with communication difficulties and social anxieties. Idja, now a bright-eyed 6-year-old, was its unofficial, yet most vital, participant. She wasn't a patient, but a helper, a bridge, Her own journey through fear and silence had given her an intuitive understanding of the other children. One of the first children to arrive was Lucas, a 7-year-old boy with autism spectrum disorder who rarely spoke and recoiled from physical contact. He moved through the world encased in a bubble of anxious silence. For days, he would only sit in a corner of the barn's cozy reading nook, watching, his small hands clenched. Edya, sensing his fear, didn't push. Instead, she would sit nearby, sometimes reading quietly to Max, sometimes just stroking his soft fur. Her gentle murmur, a soothing undercurrent in the quiet space. Max, too, seemed to understand. He wouldn't approach Lucas directly, but would often lie down a respectful distance away, his head on his paws, emitting soft, contented sighs. It was a silent offering of presence. Without demand, one afternoon, Ella was helping Lucas build a tower with soft blocks. It was a slow, tentative process. Max lay nearby, occasionally thumping his tail when Ella praised Lucas's careful placement of a block. Suddenly, the tower wobbled and collapsed. Lucas let out a frustrated cry, his body tensing, his hands flying to his ears. It was a prelude to a meltdown they had seen before. But then, Max did something unexpected. He rose slowly, walked over to the scattered blocks, and gently nudged one with his nose towards Lucas. He looked at the boy, then at Ella, then back at the boy, a soft whine escaping him. Edya, understanding his cue, said softly, "It's okay, Lucas. Max wants to help." "See you, Lucas," peeking through his fingers. "Watch the big dog." Max nudged another block. Then, incredibly, Lucas lowered his hands. He looked at Max, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. He reached out a hesitant finger and touched Max's velvety nose. Max leaned into the touch, his tail giving a slow, happy sweep, a tiny smile, the first anyone at Hope Haven had seen from him, touched Lucas's lips. He then reached out and tentatively patted Max's head. "Doggy," he whispered, his first word at the center. Ella's own smile was radiant. Max, the dog Graham had tried to twist into a weapon, had become their most gifted teacher. He possessed an almost preternatural ability to sense what each child needed. A gentle nudge, a warm body to lean against, a patient, non-judgmental ear. He understood the language of averted gazes, of clenched fists, of silent tears. He listened with his whole being, offering comfort that transcended words. He was the embodiment of unconditional acceptance. A year passed, filled with small miracles and quiet triumphs. Hope Haven flourished, its waiting list growing, its reputation spreading. On the first anniversary of its openings, they held a small celebration. The sun, a benevolent gold, streamed through the open barn doors. Families, volunteers, and supporters gathered on hay bales and mismatched chairs. The highlight of the simple ceremony was Ella, no longer the terrified, silent child who had arrived at Lakeshore Pines. She was now confident, articulate. She navigated through the guests in her familiar wheelchair, this time adorned with bright, colorful wildflowers she and Lucas had picked that morning. Max walked proudly beside her, his leash held loosely in her hand, his tail wagging gently. When it was her turn to speak, Amanda lifted her to a small podium. Ella took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the friendly faces, finally resting on Max. "I used to be scared," she began, her voice clear and steady. "Though soft, I was scared that nobody loved me. I thought maybe I wasn't good enough for anyone to love." Her gaze drifted for a moment, a shadow of memory, then returned, brighter. But Max always knew. He loved me, even when I was too scared to know who I was. He showed me that love isn't something you have to earn. It just is. She reached down and stroked Max's head. Hope Haven is here because everyone deserves to feel that kind of love. Like Max's love, as applause, warm and heartfelt, filled the barn. Ella beamed. Later, as the celebration wound down and the sky outside turned a brilliant, fiery orange, Amanda found Ella sitting with Max near the paddock fence, watching the rescued horses graze peacefully. Max rested his head in Ella's lap, his eyes half closed in contentment. He looked up towards the setting sun, his noble profile silhouetted against the vibrant colors, his gaze serene. The dog, who had been cruelly mistreated, whose very nature had been perverted in an attempt to serve a man's darknesses, was now, irrefutably, a symbol of unwavering hope, a testament to the resilient, healing power of love. He was home. They all were. If this story moved you, made you think twice, or simply left you speechless, tell us, what would you have done if you were there? Would you have trusted the dog? Would you have believed the truth behind those gates? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. And if you love stories where animals become heroes, secrets unravel, and justice finds a way, hit that subscribe button so you won't miss what's coming next. Because sometimes, the quietest watchers carry the loudest truths.